Welcome to Dilemma. This is your host, Jay Shapiro, joined as always by co-host Coleman Hughes.
Hello.
And we're joined with a guest host, Danielle Tomson. Say hi.
Hey, guys.
So this week's Dilemma is called Listen to the Music. It's about the ethics of continuing to listen to or not a musician after it's revealed that they're quite the jerk. So let's listen.
I'm just going to read the dilemma this week. All of the fake celebrity impersonation voices are busy. So here's the dilemma. Frankie greatly enjoyed the music of Pan-Fried Onions. She bought all their albums and went to all their shows when they came to town. She liked this band because they have a very light, summery sound, and they always seemed like fun people in live performances. However, as Frankie learned more about this band, she discovered that the lead singer regularly makes sexist comments in interviews and donates to political organizations that Frankie believes are harmful to women. Most problematically, the lead singer recently pleaded guilty to criminal harassment for stalking and harassing his ex-wife. Frankie is upset to learn that one of her favorite bands features an artist whose personal beliefs, values, and actions are, in her view, deeply morally wrong. She is also surprised to learn that this discovery does not affect her enjoyment of Pan-Fried Onions very much. She might not feel as inclined to attend their shows as she used to, but she finds that she still enjoys the music when it comes on the radio, and she sometimes still feels inclined to listen to it alone or with friends. She has mixed feelings about that. Part of her wishes that she could stop liking the music so that she could wash her hands of this person entirely, but given that she does still like the music, is it wrong for her to listen to it? On one hand, Frankie thinks that she can separate the music from the musician. Sure, Pan-Fried Onions have songs about dating and relationships, but these songs include very little evidence of the beliefs, values, and behaviors that Frankie finds so deeply objectionable. Also, if she listens to the music in the privacy of her own home, or with friends who understand that listening to this music is not an endorsement of the person writing or performing it, she struggles to see how her behavior could, in and of itself, be harmful. On the other hand, Frankie feels uncomfortable singing along with this artist, and she especially feels uncomfortable socially or economically supporting him. Maybe she should be seeking out other artists whose beliefs, values, and behaviors she can more fully support.
So yeah, Frankie and Pan-Fried Onions. This dilemma, I think, is something like we're all sort of dealing with every day. We just get hammered with a new name that challenges us in the way that Frankie in this particular dilemma is being challenged with. So yeah, first impressions, where are you at with it? Where do you go first?
I mean, my first impression is always to think of all of the artists we would have to cancel if we were to take the line that their misbehavior, their bad values are a reason to not listen to them. And I don't think that exhausts the issue, but just, upon first thinking, we're talking about Michael Jackson. Mm-hmm. Can I listen to Pretty Young Thing the same way, knowing that he was very into pretty young things and much younger than I thought he meant by that song initially? Can we listen to John Lennon? I'm pretty sure he beat his partner?
I don't know anything about John Lennon's nefarious past. What is it? Do you know?
I have never heard that.
And this is also
You never heard that?
I actually challenged this.
I may have completely made that up. Didn't he beat
slandering John Lennon?
I'm pretty sure he beat his wife, girlfriend.
Yoko? Really?
Maybe either. We should probably look this up before I slander the dead. But
yeah,
very hard. No, it's kind of hard. I mean, R. Kelly, right? First thing that comes to my mind. Can you really enjoy Ignition? Can you really enjoy Bump and Grind anymore after knowing? Can you really think about who is really in the closet when you know now that there might have been little girls in his closet? I can't.
I'm impressed that you know the name of an R. Kelly album, or two of them apparently.
You're calling me out here, Jay. It's making it a little difficult. But no, I hear you. It's hard to think about canceling artists, but for me, it kind of depends on the epic that we're thinking about. Should we cancel Wagner? Should we cancel Disney for anti-Semitic reasons? I don't know. It's kind of difficult.
And what does canceling even mean?
Yeah, right? When you're on Instagram, it's easier to cancel. And when that artist is still in production for things, for instance, in this example, would Frankie buy new albums of Pan-Fried Onions or go to their concerts? It's one thing if you're listening to something that you already own, but I think of the example of Nike and people burning their Nike gear after the Kaepernick example, and I'm thinking, why are y'all burning your socks? Those, you already bought those. This isn't a boycott. So for me, it came down to what's her future action going to be, not what is her taste right now or in the past.
Yeah, we get into. I'll introduce our guest interview this week was Nina Strohminger. She's a psychologist at University of Pennsylvania in the Wharton School of Business and Legal Ethics. And yeah, we get into all of these variables of if the artist is dead, what is the art? Does it matter if we're talking about a musician or an actor or anything else? I don't know if you have any final thoughts before we just jump into the interview with Nina.
Final thoughts are Charles Mingus is one of my favorite jazz musicians, and he stabbed people. And that has never given me even a moment of pause in listening to him. I don't know why that is. That's interesting because I would have a moment of pause with certain other people. I don't know. It's interesting to think that even my own brain doesn't necessarily obey rational principles in this, even though upon reflection, I'd like to apply similar standards to different artists.
Yeah, that's in the dilemma as written. What I think is super careful of the writing of it is also when it says like part of her wish is that she could stop liking the music, and so we're just forced to end up talking about the free will question again. Like, do you have the ability to stop liking something even if you still like it, and how do you reconcile that with your own the self that you are, the kind of self that still listens to pan-fried onions in this case is something that Frankie's having trouble with. So let's just jump into Nina and then we'll come back with more. So thank you, Nina Strohminger, for being on Dilemma. So I don't know, let's just start with how you answer this one. The answer for you, how you handle the situation, and then do you think there is a normative claim about how we ought to approach this?
I guess I don't really know how to answer that question as you've phrased it. Because there's more than one question here, right? There's the question of, if you mean by the question how they conduct themselves in their personal lives have any bearing at all on whether we should consume the music or other artistic product, period. I mean, surely the answer must be yes at some point. But, beyond that, I mean, we're going to be looking at the subtleties of that question.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, what subtleties ring out to you the most? Is it the nature of the offense? Is that a variable that pushes it in one direction for you? Is it the financial sort of incentive? Are you enriching someone with?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two basic working parts here. One is the severity of the offense, and then I guess you could say the other one is how much are you contributing to what the artist is doing by consuming their artistic output. I will say that I really objected to the name of the musician. Just not just maybe morally problematic, but also aesthetically.
Pan-fried onions.
Yeah,
doesn't
it's
do
bad.
It for you. Yeah, I couldn't even imagine what kind of music they do. But the language, maybe that we could talk about it, is the language with these is always so intricate, as you know. They've written this as, is it morally acceptable? Which is a term, every term is loaded when you're talking about moral philosophy. You talk about moral obligations, you talk about moral intuitions, like all of these different things.
Well, morally acceptable, I think, is maybe the most neutral way of putting it, right? Saying you don't have an obligation to do one thing or another, but is it okay to do this thing?
Yeah. So start with that one. For Frankie, she likes this musician still, right? She likes pan-fried onions. And so is it morally acceptable for her? Let's just say to listen. We'll go with the simplest case. Alone in her bedroom on the headphones. Is this okay?
Well, I want to start with a even more like primal question, which is it okay for her to enjoy it? It seems, at least the way that the dilemma is written, that there's some question as to, is there something wrong with her for, not somehow the part of her brain that enjoys this band's music to not also, to just stop liking it, the music, or enjoying the music at a basic level. And I don't really think that we can fault her for that, right? As Woody Allen said, the heart wants what the heart wants. So I would say that there's I don't think any kind of moral problem with just enjoying. If by enjoying you mean take pleasure in.
Yeah.
But there's different ways you can consume music and other kinds of media, some of which are begin to impinge on affecting the artist or not, right? So if it just comes on the radio, or if you have an MP3 that's downloaded, that strikes me as very different than pulling it up on Spotify even, right? Because that's affecting the artist's hits and how popular they are and so forth.
So you think once Frankie has the knowledge that this singer is a real jerk, she has an obligation to try to find like the least impactful way. If she still enjoys the music, that's sort of beyond her control. If she's going to engage in that enjoyment, she should try to find the least sort of financially impactful.
Financially, but maybe also socially, right? So if other people know that she's listening to them. But people are very conformist by nature. And so if you're playing music or if people know that you're listening to the music, that is itself a kind of endorsement. And we know from countless social psychology studies that people's behavior is really strongly affected by what other people are doing around them. And I mean, kind of to bring this in with the, R. Kelly or Bill Cosby, and we knew about these accusations, for instance, in those two instances for decades.
Yeah.
And or even news, it wasn't just gossip, right? There were news reports. But it wasn't until, I think, people began to sense that, like, wait, everyone isn't just looking the other way anymore. I guess I should stop looking the other way too. People began to change their behavior accordingly.
Yeah. So like if she was a DJ at a bar or something, it sounds like Frankie might be a young girl, but if she's a DJ at a bar, like playing it publicly is a different moral calculus than just playing it alone in her car, in your view?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, totally.
And so how would you, again, like these are all like, what should Frankie do is sort of an interesting way to phrase it. What would Nina do?
What would Nina do?
Yeah, what would you do?
Well, it's true that people often ask themselves, what would Nina do in order to guide themselves morally? So I'm happy to help people with that. But thank you for laughing.
I have the bracelet.
Right.
I'm trying to change.
Right. Most people have the tattoo. The bracelet's not as committed, but that's okay. If you take the what the dilemma for what it actually says, it says not only is he making sexist comments, but this lead singer has pled guilty to criminal harassment for stalking and harassing his ex-wife. So it seems pretty cut and dried. There's no question about whether he's done what he's done. Is the question? Are you asking me? Would I stop playing his music as a DJ?
Let's go with both. Let's try DJ and then listen to it. Given the information as is before I start playing with it, as written, what we know.
I'd boycott.
You'd boycott.
I'd boycott.
And so on what, in your own, even if you still enjoy it, you love this band, Pan Fried Onions is like your favorite, you would sort of cut off your own enjoyment of that thing.
Well, but the enjoyment wouldn't be. I'm engaged in some perspective thinking here, but I think that my engagement would now be tainted by my understanding of who this person is. It's not, maybe there's a really low level at which I'm capable of deriving enjoyment, but now it's painted over with the understanding this person is a jerk or a criminal. Yeah.
So this brings up this, like, I think there's a really deeper question here that I'm going to start playing with of, I'm going to change the question. Do you have an obligation to find out the politics of a musician you love? Let's say you're listening to someone in your car that you just love and your friend gets in the car and they're like, have you heard about this singer? Could you say like, don't tell me because I like it and I don't want that information to taint my enjoyment? Do you have an obligation to actually find this out? Or if you were playing it in a bar and one of the patrons was like, this is really offensive to me. Can you say, I don't want that information in my brain? Or do you have an obligation to actually discover the politics of someone that you... The
politics? I think the politics is a little bit different than their...
behavior.
I wasn't going to say behavior than doing something that's really offensive. Like this, to me, is not politics. It's not that this person has bad politics. It's that they harm others.
But does endorsing it make it sort of a political act on your part? If you're if you're playing R. Kelly right now, is that like a political statement, whether you like it to be or not?
It's certainly a statement of my values.
Right.
Yeah.
And so would you have an obligation to find out that information if you're listening to someone?
Well, I think that in the way that you stated it, as a person comes to me and says, have you heard about what they... listen, I'm informavore. I want to know. But I wouldn't say that I have an obligation in the sense of, of course I'd be lying if I said, do I, look into the moral and political history of all the artists whose work I consume? No, I don't.
Yeah, so that last question about the obligation to find out, we kind of had a moment in our opening with John Lennon because I still don't know what he's done. and I really like the Beatles and I really like their music. And I don't know if I want that information in my head if it taints it.
Yeah, I guess it's different for me. I don't have any particular like for the Beatles. I like some of their nicer songs, but I just didn't grow up with that music. It never really got into me. So
Me either.
I don't feel, but it
Who are you?
it brings up a point, which is that the consumer is in some sense being punished for the presence of information and how good journalism has gotten. And we're being punished disproportionately for artists of our own time because everything gets out nowadays. We're not being punished. If we knew everything about Beethoven, everything about Mozart and Bach, there are things to find there. We know Wagner was potentially a Nazi or was a Nazi, right?
He was anti-Semitic. He wrote a paper on Judaism and music about the effects that Judaism had that were so derogatory in music, and it was published. Maybe if that wasn't published, it would have gone to his grave and we would have never known what Wagner thought of the Jews.
Right.
But I mean, I hear you. I was going through a list of artists this morning, and I did not want to know that Ronald Dahl was an anti-Semite. Did not want to hear. Sorry, listeners. But for me, going to that point of punishing people today because, and the artists of our generation, I think art is different today because in order to be a successful artist, you not only have to have good singing or good painting or good art, you also have to have a personality that is willing to respond on social media, that's willing to react. So your personality is actually the art. Would Cardi B be as successful as she is today if she weren't so lovable on Instagram? I don't know. So I think our art is the self in a way that it never has been before.
Yeah. And that's a high bar.
Yeah.
To cross. I mean, we'll get into that certainly later, Nina and I.
Paul Bloom?
I studied with Paul Bloom in college.
Okay, perfect. So do you know his book, How Pleasure Works? The central thesis of that book is that the way the human brain gets pleasure from art is in a, quote, essentialist way. What he means by essentialist is that we ascribe a kind of essence to the artist, and that is the reason, for example, that people will pay millions of dollars for an original Van Gogh, but an identical copy that is literally like a molecule for molecule replica is worth $0. Yep. That rationally, that makes no sense unless human beings are treating art in an essentialist way. The artist does mean something to us. But that said, not every domain of human creativity obeys that rule. So for example, with science, how much sleep are you losing over the fact that Isaac Newton was a douchebag?
No. Yeah.
Very little.
Yeah.
And it strikes me there's a spectrum with science all the way on one end and art and probably comedy, I would say, all the way on the other. And the question for me is, where is music? Because it's kind of in between.
It feels subjective. I mean, maybe we're going to have someone who will be on the podcast is David Deutsch, who has a pretty elaborate pitch for the notion of objective beauty, which is a very controversial notion because it feels so subjective. And in this case, it's subjective. If there is such a thing as objective beauty that is in some way analogous to science, that someone's discovered some sort of objective beauty, then that question becomes really different. Was Mozart's music objectively better than a 5-year-old banging, mindlessly on a piano?
Yeah.
It's a hard philosophical question to answer, but if the answer is yes at all, then that question becomes really, and we're going to get into sort of the utilitarian calculus of that later, of this is adding flourishing to the world in some way, and then is there a cost to walking away from an artist because he's a jerk, the same way that we would all suffer by walking away from Isaac Newton's findings because he's a jerk?
That's very true. Well, there are sciences in music of certain number of RPMs and certain beats in the music industry now that everyone uses. I mean, just think of auto-tune as a good example. And so it sort of thinks there is a science maybe to sound and enjoyment, but also, if you could take a Kantian view, that beauty is not an objective truth. It's just an aesthetic judgment based off of a feeling that you get. But if that feeling is objective, if that feeling is able to be monitored especially given all the data we have now on human enjoyment and likes. I don't know.
Yeah. But then is it just as you can replicate it just the same way you could replicate, like a painting is easy to imagine there of making a perfect copy. If I can perfectly replicate your qualia of an experience of listening to some song, then have I solved the problem? Actually, we're going to get into this in a minute because this is this notion of like the challenge of like, listen, there's a lot of music out there. You don't have to listen to R. Kelly. You can find someone else who sounds enough like R. Kelly. You'll be fine. But there's exceptions to that rule. It seems that we classify as artistic geniuses. So how are you tackling this problem then with, I mean, pan-fried onions is fake, but do you like the analogy of Kevin Spacey or even someone like Michael Jackson, which is a tough one. I was reading some, in preparation for this, I was reading a lot of people make this argument. Tell me how it hits you. The argument of, well, there's a lot of music out there. So like, you don't have to listen to R. Kelly. You can find 20 other musicians who sound enough like R. Kelly that like, you'll scratch the itch. Michael Jackson's a tough case for people because he's so damn good and so unique that they're like, well, maybe you can't find another Michael.
And does it matter? Even he's dead. It's not like he's being enriched.
This is the other variable. But what about, listening to Wagner or, you start going through history. And we're just talking about music now. We can start talking about
right.
Artists of all kinds.
Well, and Hitler was one of history's great painters. We all know that.
I actually have never seen a Hitler painting. Is he good?
No.
Okay. I'm glad. It's an
fortunate
obligation
for us that he's not a good painter.
It's an obligation that in every Dilemma episode we will mention Hitler at least
good.
7 times.
All right. So we've Godwined
painter.
ourselves 10 minutes in.
Yeah. But yeah, let's go with that variable. He's dead or she's dead. Can you no longer be personally enriched? Is this now?
Maybe it changes the calculus somewhat. I don't think it removes the dilemma altogether, right? Because it's still an endorsement of sorts. And Woody Allen will die one day. So does that mean that I can go back to watching Annie Hall? Yeah.
Has that been tough for you since the Woody Allen?
It hasn't been tough for me because I've already seen all his good movies. And the new movies he makes aren't good. So it actually works out quite sort of conveniently.
So we'll bring us back to the pan-fried onion stuff, but I want to keep playing with some of the variables of it a little bit. Tell me if I get it wrong. Like you think the moral sort of calculus for yourself, at least, is to try to do everything you can to limit the financial enrichment or political endorsement of a public broadcast of your enjoyment of this music as much as possible, given sort of,
right. I mean, you could also think of it as their stature enrichment, right? Even if they're not making money off of it, by playing their music or whatever other form the medium takes, you're contributing to their respectability or the respect amongst in the society at large, which is of course in many ways more valuable than are they making a few extra pennies if you play their music.
Right.
Yeah.
And in this particular offense, it crosses this barrier for you at least
for me.
Of this is like
there's
person.
bigger crimes.
Yeah.
But this.
And so to start tweaking some of those variables, let's see if I can find the borders of these things for you. Let's first talk about the pan-fried onions guy, the artists themselves. We talked a little bit about what if they're dead, and it changes some of your calculus. Then, of course, maybe it becomes easier not to enrich this person personally, but maybe the values are still expressed. What about if they apologize? This didn't happen in this one, but what about...
if they apologize, and it seems genuine, then you're given some sense that their behavior could change, then that's fine. I believe in forgiveness. But most apologies don't come across as genuine. And most people who apologize publicly, I think, reoffend. But, our whole system of criminal justice is based on the idea that you can, serve your time, as it were, whether it's in a penitentiary or in the public eye, and then sort of come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as soon as the apology is made, the enjoyment for the music would return?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I think that, I don't know for me personally, when would the enjoyment of music return, but in terms of where how morally problematic is it, I think if a person really, it seems like it's a heartfelt apology where they understand what they did was wrong, and they not only acknowledge that it was wrong, but also seem to convey, like, I get what I get why.
Yeah.
then yeah, I don't think it becomes as much of a dilemma anymore.
And does the calculus change if I start playing the variable of the kind of art that's being produced? In this case, as a musician, we have maybe a specific kind of thing. What about a Kevin Spacey situation where we have an actor? Like, I never watched House of Cards. I've heard it's a very good show, but is that now more difficult? Or Bill Cosby, where then to complicate it, participating in it, there's a lot of people involved. Maybe you could say the same thing for a musician. There's a lot of people involved that are financially at stake with it. Like, are you hurting some small supporting actress by boycotting the Cosby Show when you're really trying to target Bill himself?
Well, but what else are you supposed to do?
I don't know. I guess that's why
Yeah,
it's
I
a
don't.
dilemma.
At least for the examples that come to mind and the ones that you've given, I don't think that the medium of the art should matter. Maybe the quality of the art matters a little.
Yeah.
Which feels weird to say.
It was someone used the term a behavioral hall pass. Claire Dederer wrote this interesting article.
And so what does that mean?
Because the art is just so good that we give them sort of this pass. It was like a special dispensation and who gets it. And she was struggling with Woody Allen. She names Roman Polanski, Woody Allen, Bill Cosby, William Burroughs. These aren't people who ought to get it, but these are people she's struggling with.
Candidates.
Richard Wagner, Sid Vicious, Norman Mailer, Ezra Pound. Like, it goes on and on.
You know what's interesting?
Floyd Mayweather, the boxer. It's like, you could go.
Well, right. I mean, yeah.
Phil Spector.
I mean, are there any good people at all? Maybe we just need to stop consuming art.
This might be the thing, but I mean, it's the general base question here is the separate the art from the artist question. Is it possible?
You know what's interesting about the behavioral hall pass idea to me is that how utilitarian it is, right? So it embeds within it this understanding that we have some sort of algebraic equation that we're doing in our heads that involves an output, and the output is what maximizes the good in the world, the beauty in the world, the moral goodness in the world, or whatever else. And the items that you can put on this equation can include not only like how bad is this person or how bereft are we as a society if we're implicitly endorsing that behavior or those beliefs, but also what is the artistic or cultural merit of what they're producing. And as a utilitarian, I think a utilitarian, at least if you had utilitarian commitments, you would be obligated to say, yeah, you should include how good the art is.
How would you, I mean, that's such a subjective measure. Are we talking about notions of objective beauty? Can I just tell you, listen, I love R. Kelly. I Believe I Can Fly is like, it's my jam.
Yeah.
It brings me ultimate joy. And so like that passes the genius level.
So,
for me.
So it's one thing to say, well, in theory, this can operate within some utilitarian framework, but then in practice, and presumably this is the reason why philosophers would say this is problematic, is that we're going to be highly motivated in our reasoning. I don't think we're going to be capable of objectively seeing, just how much of a contribution is this compared to contributions we could get from other artists. Yeah.
My hardest one is Mel Gibson. In my own.
Really?
I actually think he's an incredibly good director. So my background is film directing.
Yeah.
And Apocalypto is this film that came out sort of in the whirlwind of his like anti-Semitic rants to cops or whatever he was doing. And I think that movie is just brilliant.
Yeah.
And I feel weird telling people still about Mel.
Well, we have an administrative assistant who sits right outside my door. She has a picture or two of her with Mel Gibson. Just she met him and so she got a selfie, and they're really cute pictures, but you can't help but think like, wait, like maybe, like it's clear that at least one of the pictures were taken pre-anti-Semitic rant. I'm not sure about the other one, and I never asked her about like, maybe you could, and it's not just that she has it on her phone, right? It's like displayed prominently on her cubicle for anyone who's walking by to see. And if it were me, even if I were a huge Mel Gibson fan, I think I might have like kind of surreptitiously like taken it down and just maybe put the photo away.
I won't apologize for my Mel Gibson love here.
I was about to say, Jay, really? Apocalypto?
Yeah. Wait, have you seen it, Coleman?
No.
All right. So.
I just thought it was really over the top. Went to Tulum recently. Locals have a lot to say about Apocalypto and also how the staff on that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Don't tell me. See, I don't want to know. This is like my obligation. I don't want that to be ruined.
Well, I won't.
I've literally seen Apocalypto twice. So but it was great.
I can't say something, but while I was listening to that, I looked up the John Lennon thing, okay? And I'm sorry to shatter your world right now.
Wait, this is my moment to be like,
this is your moment.
Can I say, like, I don't want to know? All right, fine, bring it.
Disclaimer.
I'm not going to wait for your consent here. I'm just going to tell you. He admitted to almost murdering someone who questioned his sexuality once. He beat his wife, admitted to beating his wife and, quote, several other women in a Playboy interview just before his death.
These Playboy interviews.
And
no one should talk to Playboy, it turns out.
You know what's very interesting about this is that last year, the rapper XXX Tentacion, who was one of my favorites, right? And my whole friend group was obsessed with this dude. He was absolutely at the top of the rap game like just a year ago. When he was in jail, he almost murdered someone who questioned his sexuality, who like gave him a look, you know, perhaps assuming he was gay or something, almost beat the dude to death, just like John Lennon, beat his girlfriend, just like John Lennon, and this all came out. And then he got killed, got shot, just like John Lennon.
Wow.
And
karma.
When that happened, when he died,
assholes.
My friends and I, we were posting on social media, like, you know, he was great, like so sad or whatever. And then people were blowing up our posts like, you can't do that. Don't you realize that he beat his girlfriend? He was a terrible person. We were like, we're not defending any of that. And then the irony is like, these are probably the same people going back to their dorm rooms with their little hipster turntables, listening to the White Album.
But Coleman, can you still listen to XXX Tentacion? What was the loss for you? Was it the future returns or the future albums? Was it the loss of a talent? What do you still listen to it? Because I know I can't listen to R. Kelly anymore. I'm too disgusted. Taste is subjective, and you know, once you have a bad tomato, you can't eat tomatoes anymore. And for me, once I heard out about R. Kelly, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
Can you?
Yes, I could.
Really?
Yes. And I think it goes back to my point about the spectrum. For some reason, for example, Louis C.K. was, and I would say is, my favorite comedian, maybe tied with Dave Chappelle. Once the allegations came out, I've seen him several times in New York since then, and I will say I can't hear his jokes quite the same way. And I don't like that fact, but it's just, I cannot hear it. It's not that I don't enjoy it. It's just different.
This comes up directly later. I won't spoil what I say about Louis C.K.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay. But for some reason with music, it doesn't change for me.
The art and the artist, but like to like when she brings, I really like this utilitarian framework idea and this notion of, so I don't know exactly when the John Lennon things happened. If that had happened now, if we just, you know, if Twitter existed when that was happening, and let's say we killed John Lennon's career and just buried him at that moment before he wrote the White Album, would we, as in the universe A that has the White Album in it versus universe B that does not have the White Album in it, is there a utilitarian, flourishing, suffering calculus that matters there of the like, yeah, someone's going to get punched in the face, whatever he did, almost killed or whatever it is, for universe A to exist that has the White Album? It's a hard question for me. White Album being like something people generally consider genius. I don't know.
For me, it's the domain in which the punishment happens. So, for instance, if John Lennon beat someone up, beat his wife, did the time, served his sentence, and then released the White Album, I feel I would have an easier time with that because the domain in which the punishment happens is important. In the instance of, say, someone like Harvey Weinstein, for instance, will you watch a Miramax movie? Right? But the question is, we had to elevate all of that abuse and maybe boycott things or you know, change our behavior in order for that to come to light. So once that person is punished in a court of law, are we able to then go back and enjoy those things because we got real justice or not? Yeah. And I think that's important. The question of where the punishment happens and when.
And if they were never punished, in this case, John Lennon apparently like escaped the at least social punishment for this thing, given the time he was in. Can we punish him now? Like can we do this? Like, all right, we're gonna just like hate John Lennon for the next 20 years, and then it's gonna be okay again.
I'm surprised it hasn't happened. I don't know the rules either, because
people escape.
Twitter. I don't know when this will be released necessarily, but We're in the time when Twitter just blew up over John Wayne.
Yep. You're right. John Lennon's probably coming.
John Lennon is closer to our time. He was born, 30 years after John Wayne? 33 years after John Wayne? More, probably bigger than John Wayne by world historical standards. More people know about John Lennon.
Yeah.
I'm surprised we haven't kind of retroactively canceled him.
If this is the podcast that blows up John Lennon,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
But no, that's a great moral dilemma there of is the for the utilitarian calculus, should we release this? Let's say I knew that this was going to do it. This would go crazy viral and bring down John Lennon. People are going to be burning Beatles albums in the streets. Am I committing a utilitarian crime there by you've just I don't know, diminished flourishing for future generations because they're not going to get the genius of the Beatles' art? Yeah, the underlying question between all of this and this whole thing is, can you separate the art from the artist, period? Or should you separate the art from the artist? And then, does the domain matter? I don't know about all of these. This one is another really hard one to make a normative claim, to bring it back to the language of the actual pan-fried onions and Frankie thing here. She's struggling because she's the way it's written, it's I wish I didn't like it. Or a part of her wishes she didn't like it, but she likes it. And if that thing is beyond your control, I definitely get into this later with Nina of this other really interesting notion of again, this notion of moral luck. If you're just lucky that you stop liking it, maybe you are. It sounds like I don't know what's happening at the table here. Maybe your dials are just attuned a little differently than Coleman's, where the art and the artist are more separated for you versus you. And that feels like something that's beyond your control. Frankie's going to listen to pan-fried onions alone in a room. I don't care what she thinks she ought to do, I think it's
teachable.
Dude.
For me, at least it is. I remember I used to love Tristan und Isolde by Wagner, and I'm Jewish. So recently when I went to Poland and learned a little more about the Holocaust, was in concentration camps, and I was thinking of Wagner, and they talked about how that sometimes would play over loudspeakers. I couldn't do it anymore. And I think as I learned more and more, I trained myself to essentially not like Wagner as much. Yeah. And I think the same can go for pan-fried onions. If she just kept exposing herself to the misogyny and the crime and the disgusting element, I think that's how you train taste. And that can go for music, that can go for visual art, that can go for politics. How much do you want to create disgust around a certain subject area?
Yeah.
I'm glad no one ever asked Wagner what he thought of black people. Or by the way, probably any musician from that era.
Yeah.
What did all of them think about black people? The fact that we don't know and we don't even think to ask, I think it's fine. But if they had all written what was the opinion of their era, does that mean that a black person who likes classical music should be should feel a certain way about listening to them?
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like you ask, can we separate the art from the artist? And that question can either be a moral one, i.e. should we separate art from artist? Or it can just be a factual one, some people do it, some people don't, and it's kind of to each their own.
Wagner's an interesting case with the art and the artist separation, because I'm wondering about the content of the art, which we're sort of talking of, is it genius or not here, but actually the content. I don't know this rapper that you mentioned, the one who died, or any of his lyrics or any of his songs.
Oh, they're heinous.
See, well, that's the thing.
Absolutely heinous.
Does it matter if so Wagner, and this is if an alien just heard the music and you were the music itself, is the music itself anti-Semitic? Or was it written by an anti-Semite? And if especially that one with no words, is just instruments. There's not someone yelling kill the Jews in an operatic voice, which would be a different kind of this is anti-Semitic. I wonder if you were mentioning the domain and the punishment, the art itself and the domain as it comes out. I just really want, for me, it feels like if you like the musical piece of a Wagner piece, it doesn't, to me, feel directly touched by Wagner. If you need the extra information of reading a biography of Wagner to then suddenly dislike the art, is that the science experiment you need to do to be well then, I don't know.
Your point, it brings up, for me, the situation, which is precisely the reverse of the one we're talking about now. Right now, we're talking about situations where The art is great and the values expressed in the art are great, and yet the artist is shitty.
Yeah.
What about the other way
Exactly.
around? Someone like another rapper, Tyler, the Creator, his songs, when the songs that made him popular were absolutely vile, lots of murder and rape imagery, but the person himself, a lot homophobic language. And it turned out that he himself is bisexual years later, has never so much as heard a fly. He's like the nicest dude you could possibly imagine, but got banned from England and Australia on account of the pure rage in his music. But like, look at any interview with this guy. He's just like the most charming and like not a, he's never hurt anyone.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because he suffered in the mainstream for the content of his music. But then there are these other cases. I saw this amazing thing on Twitter the other day, which was this band that their top 5 songs on Spotify, I don't remember the name of the band. Their top 5 songs were like, I have skulls in my house. I like to murder. And then it was posed right next to an article about how the lead singer of the band literally had skulls in his house and had been arrested for murder.
Yeah.
Like he just admitted to crimes so you could see when people listen to Tyler, the Creator, they don't know if he's category A where they're just saying stuff in character or category B where they're just admitting to crimes in a song.
So is there a way, if I can get like political with this, a lot of my reading with it has framed, I think we should talk about sort of the outrage culture, Twitter mobs that's happening in this sphere, obviously. If this was a real case with pan-fried onions, I imagine this singer would be just, trending on Twitter, people calling each other Nazis who happen to listen to it and all this. Is there how do we carve those lines now that everything is just so, I don't know, public and shared? Your approach to the case saying like, I wouldn't, imagine if you were a bartender and you say like, I won't play pan-fried onions, or let's say a huge pan-fried onions fan comes into your bar that night and request that you play it, and maybe they're pulling a stunt and you say, no, like, I'm not going to do it. It's like a moral boycott against pan-fried onions.
Yeah.
And then they tweet it and like take a picture of you and suddenly you're trending here or there. Like, is there a problem with maybe how publicly that we're deliberating all of this stuff, or is this a good thing? I don't know.
You mean, should people be tried in the court of public opinion or in normal courts only?
I don't know. I'm just trying to put this case into reality and imagine
Yeah.
how it would actually play out. And I don't know. Is that affecting maybe our moral analysis or making people feel
Well,
like,
right. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, people are conformist, and that can, be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Because it can bring about, good social change or bad social change, but in a way, without having at least some sense of where the tide is turning, then no behavior would change, at least on the whole. I think where it becomes especially problematic is when it's just a rumor and it's not true. But at least the way this dilemma is set up is that there's no question, right? He made these sexist comments. He pled guilty to criminal behavior. So if people want to get angry, then that's valid.
yeah.
Yeah, angry publicly.
Yeah. And boycotting it is, and so is there a way, I know like you're hesitant to make normative claims as most people are, but do you think there is a normative claim here of an ought, that people ought to adopt some sort of behavior or rule or test that we can design here beyond what Frankie should do?
Yeah.
Do you think there's something that we really ought to do about the pan-fried onions dilemma?
Well, so here's how I think of this, both as an academic and as a human being. You can view all of your actions towards pan-fried onions, whether they're conducted privately or publicly, as, in a way, a form of self-expression, right? Who am I? What do I represent? What do I value? And that consumption of the art is, in a way, an act of self-creation in itself. And so, at the end of the day, it's just about, can you live with yourself for the way you conducted your life? Yeah. So, I mean, to the extent that I kind of would bring it into or see it in a normative way, it would be in that way. What does it say about you? Or does it say something good about you that you're okay with this? Yeah.
And for you, you're not okay with listening to pan-fried onions after the fact of knowing this. And what does that say about you? What if I say, like, I'm totally fine? In fact, I think I might be fine with it. If I really like that music, like life's short. I like the music. There's only so much joy out there. I'm going to keep listening to this. Yeah. Do you think I'm making a mistake that I shouldn't be able to live with myself, the version of myself that's okay with that?
I wouldn't go so far as to say you're making a mistake. Maybe I would say I don't want to be your friend or something.
Really?
But maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I wouldn't go so far as to just say, like, you're making a mistake, you're just wrong, and it's indefensible completely or something.
So how do you, because like maybe that's a really good segue into almost that last thing with the Twitter thing, because the friend thing is interesting. Okay. So let's say you get into the car after this interview and your friend's there and they're playing R. Kelly and you have that same exact discussion. Would you be prepared to be like, I don't know if I could be friends with you? Like, how do you approach?
I would think less of them.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I would say to their face, I can't be friends with you. I mean, I'm far too passive aggressive.
You just like turn up your own, putting your headphones.
Right, yeah. I would not agree to brunch again. I would be busy.
Wow.
I mean, in principle, I don't know.
And it's like, can you make the best argument against yourself at that point? Let's say you get into that car with your friend and they say like, I can separate the art from the artist. I don't like what this person does, but I love this music and I love the song and like, sorry. But if they ask you, they're like, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with me listening to this? How do you answer that?
Well, again, I'm very passive aggressive, so I wouldn't say anything and I would just be quiet and I would pretend that everything was okay.
What would you write on your Twitter feed?
Okay, yeah, right, yeah. What would I write in my diary later when I was angry? Well, I mean, I guess it would go back to what I was saying earlier about what does it say about the kind of person that you are that that you are okay with this. This is a person who's abused teenage women for years, decades, right? The fact that it doesn't impact how you see the artist is, it just doesn't reflect well on you. I don't know how else to put it, right? Just at the base, I don't get it. Yeah. But that's not a sophisticated philosophical response. So
yeah, I don't think any it's impossible with all of these.
I just want to say that, Jay, I am no longer being friends with you, given your love of John Lennon and your frankly disgusting condoning of beating women.
I'm sorry.
I'm not going to be passive aggressive about it. I'm going to confront you.
I appreciate the forwardness. I've lost a lot of friends over John Lennon, apparently, in the last minute.
I'm more upset about your taste in Apocalypto, I think.
Still, I'll never get over. Sorry. Yeah.
Never.
Yeah, that's a different question than the Mel Gibson himself thing. The art is just bad.
Yeah.
So I want to push on this notion that I really like that she brought up of this self-creation idea and the art that you consume, the art that you put out there as an act of self-creation. She wrote this incredibly interesting article. I'm probably going to butcher some of it, but she does a lot of interesting psychological work on the self that's important, and not even to ourselves, but to other people. And so she wrote this incredibly interesting article making a case that the true, the most important self, as in like, Danielle, you have a certain self that I'm assigning to you. And she does all these hypotheticals and thought experiments that if you have like a brain injury and then it's fixed, but like one thing goes wrong, the question basically that they ask the people who participated in is like, is that still Danielle or is she someone else? And it turns out, maybe not surprisingly, but sort of really illuminating for me, is that if you lose your sense of morality, so however you've been in the first half of this podcast, if suddenly you had a brain injury and then you said everything opposite, I would be like, oh, that's not Danielle anymore.
You mean like I like Apocalypto
exactly.
now?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you were like, I love Apocalypto and it's totally cool to listen to it, and like I can if everything you said was reversed morally, I would be like, oh, like the soul, for lack of a better word, has been replaced in Danielle and she's someone else. So I was really attracted to this notion to tie that academic work she did with this notion of self-creation of the art that you're consuming. And frankly, it was challenging to me because, I sort of outed myself as maybe I can separate the art from the artist. I don't have a problem still now. I can totally go home and listen to the Beatles. But maybe that is a problem for me, that I'm creating a self in the act of doing that maybe I shouldn't be, I don't know, so proud of. I'm not even sure like how to put that morally.
It's also making an assumption that what you consume is who you are. That seems like a very capitalist notion of self, that somehow that moral ability to cast aside someone's behavior or action just to enjoy whatever they made is okay. I don't know. That seems kind of strange to me, because what if you applied that to anything else? Like
Clothing.
iPhones, those rare earth minerals, man. Can you really bear to use a cell phone, knowing that kids who are mining those are enslaved?
Well, there's a cost to everything. I mean, and that's like what her paper is about in the moral self is like, of course, we're always making moral judgments all the time. Nothing is perfectly morally clean. So where you draw those lines is actually an important self, especially to each other and to yourself. I mean, I think that's why I love all of these and finding them out and drawing Nina's lines and drawing my lines. I don't know if I really believe her that she wouldn't be friends with me, but
I'll think about it.
I'll invite her to brunch as a test and see.
I mean, in terms of self-creation, I think it's worth saying that, you know, I've kind of come out of the music world. I was basically going to be a professional musician as of like 3 years ago. That my entire friend group was more or less in that world. And people really do create themselves out of the music they listen to. That often entails idolizing specific musicians, but it doesn't always. And it generally entails idolizing musicians in their narrow capacities as musicians. Musicians are not looking up to their idols for the most part. There are exceptions to this, and saying, I want to emulate you in every capacity. I want to emulate your politics. I want to emulate your social values. Mostly it's musicians geeking out over the virtuosity and creative capacity of that person in the narrow realm of music. That's enough usually for admiration. The presumption seems to be that people are looking at the musician in totality saying, if I listen to your music, it means I endorse your social values. I don't think, for the most part, very few music heads that I know really take that attitude in general.
Yeah, it's when in this notion of self-creation, I was thinking of like teenagers, because it's like this notion or this moment in most people's lives where you're like through this hyper self-creation because you're in this new environment in high school and you really need to establish like who I am. So like wearing a Nirvana t-shirt in my high school was an act of a self-creation for everybody else, as much, maybe more so than yourself, I think is really what her paper is about. I get actually to finish and really fully explain her paper. The other kinds of damage to your brain in her hypotheticals beyond losing your moral self was like total amnesia. Like if you got total amnesia right now, I would know you had a problem, but I would still be like, that's still Danielle. She just lost all her memories and we need to rebuild those. Versus like all kinds of other things that she wrote in her paper, which for me was illuminating, being like, oh yeah, like memories relates to the self, but isn't the self we actually care about. This moral self is the one we care about. So I don't know, yeah, like in high school wearing a Nirvana t-shirt, but now it seems like you almost want to put like a caveat, like only the music or something, like, nothing else other than like the album itself. But yeah, like I don't know, there is something, I like your pushback on it, but like the you are what you eat kind of thing feels like shallow, and I don't know how far it really goes, but you are what you consume. Maybe it's more, not even you are what you consume, it's you are what you alert everyone else that you're consuming.
Perhaps. But then that's like a very Warhol, like you are what you show and you're only your appearance, which maybe is a very Instagram celeb view of the world. And that could be kind of problematic as well. Like just what you look like is who you are. What you're willing to symbolize and put forward is who you are. And then all of those other taste preferences, the way you process information, move through an argument, learn to love. What does that say?
Yeah. Like if you aren't what you consume, I'm trying to think of like, what else are you? And I guess I'm using the word consume there in a non-capitalistic strict sense. It's more of like just art. I mean, yeah, you are what you, you are what you consume in a certain way as far as you are what you
process.
Like.
Maybe there's an alternative. Maybe it's not an opposite, but it's an alternative. Not you are what you consume, but you are who you process. So maybe on the way here, I listened to R. Kelly, Bump and Grind. And I thought to myself, I was getting a coffee and R. Kelly was on my Spotify. So I'm thinking, oh man, it's exactly what she said. Oh, I'm giving him the boost. And I thought to myself, what if this barista sees me listening to R. Kelly? I don't know, but I was doing it so that I could come here and process that information and make an opinion about something. I don't think that reflects on who I am, but it might show how I move through the world, how I argue, how I think, that I'm an open-minded person. I think what you do with what you consume is more interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think like I could presume if I were seeing you listening to R. Kelly just as a person on the street, I could think that I'm a mind reader and say, well, when you listen to R. Kelly, I know what you're getting out of the music. I know I'm in your head. Therefore, I know you're listening to it in such a way so as to endorse the artist, not just as a musician, but as a human. That would be a kind of mind reading on my part that I just think is so antithetical to the truth about art and the consumption of art, which is that it is extremely complex and extremely personal. I really don't know what you're hearing when you hear R. Kelly. I don't know in virtue of what you like it, and that's true across the board. And I do think there's a kind of mind reading going on here that I'm completely against.
Yeah, but playing it publicly, I'll share a story from Matthew Crawford's book, who we pulled a dilemma from his for another episode, where he was talking about something we've lost of the memory of going to a gym. He was like a teenager or something and going to a gym to work out. And this is like pre-cell phone, pre-iPod days where there was a boombox in the gym. And everybody was going to listen to the music on the boombox. And sort of, he's writing about sort of the hierarchy of who gets to select what's going to get played and sort of this. You can't show up on the first day and be like, I'm going to play Vanilla Ice or something like that.
The music dom,
Yeah. Whoever wins that for the day or whatever. But imagine this is the day you're going to do it. You brought your tape, you're going to put it in, you're going to press play, and all of these probably bigger men are going to hear what you're going to play. It's quite a statement. And in that little community for that moment, to use her word, what a huge act of self-creation. At least socially, the self that matters in community is the art that you broadcast in some way, what you're wearing, what you're doing, whatever. But in this particular case, what you broadcast.
Do other people have to be around? It's sort of, I joke with my friends, if you did not post a picture of you running a marathon on Instagram, did you actually run the marathon?
Yeah.
Right? I feel like people just run marathons just to post the picture. Yeah. So the question for me is a little bit, if you just listen to Vanilla Ice alone, is that as self-creating as asserting yourself in a public space and broadcasting? It's a very McLuhan-esque question. The medium is the message. Yeah. If you do it alone versus doing it publicly. And that says everything about the power relationships and,
Yeah.
I remember being in a microcosm of the gym situation you just told. When I was about 10 years old, I was in a summer camp. And the teachers told us all in this summer camp that tomorrow we're all going to listen to some music and you can bring in CDs from home. There are dozens of kids at this summer camp, YMCA summer camp, that's what it was. And only 2 kids brought in music. One kid brought in 50 Cent, Get Rich or Die Tryin'. And I brought in 2 CDs. I brought in Patti LaBelle and Michael Jackson. This is it in the year 2006, right? Because that's what I was into. And obviously, the counselors who were 50-year-old women thought I was adorable for bringing that music. I was their favorite. But I completely got laughed out of contention. We did a vote, and I was the only person who voted to listen to Michael Jackson. Everyone else voted to listen to 50 Cent, which is good because if we heard Michael Jackson, we might get the message. We would be hearing essentially someone who wanted to molest probably all of us. But the moral of this story is that we got to listen to 50 Cent talk about gangbanging in the hood, which is a great message for young 10-year-olds. Although 50 Cent seems to be a really nice guy. So I guess that makes it okay.
Yeah. In a weird way, we end the episode with that one, so I'll just jump back into it. Not 50 Cent himself, but a much more surprising reference. does it matter how old Frankie is here? Is there an age
Right.
where you sort of forgive this of like, oh, they don't understand, they just like the music, or like, and maybe that hinges on the variable of the kind of offense, if they can understand sort
Right.
of the.
Well,
the
I mean, this is a very common counter argument that's often made. Is not just how old they are, but how old is the art itself. So, is this typical of how people used to be? So, if it's 100 years ago, and well, everyone was in blackface 100 years ago, so we can't really judge them. And I think that's really valid to say what were the social norms at the time. Now, it doesn't mean that it's good. You know, we are looking, but I mean, another way of seeing this is not just is to think, well, how will we be judged in 100 years? Not well. There's a lot of stuff that we do that is morally indefensible, and that things that I think not only we have good reason to understand future generations won't like, but probably a lot of stuff that we have no way of anticipating. So it's not even as if, like, you know, if you really thought about it, you would figure out how future generations would see certain behaviors. We don't fully know, but that is maybe an unfair standard to hold ourselves to, just because it's so incalculable.
Yeah. I mean, if it's something, if it's about like eating meat in the future and they look
Right.
back on us,
That's
that's
a good
always this easy
example.
one. And it's this
Yeah.
horror. I don't know if you eat meat or not, but
I don't.
Let's just say you did. And if someone looked back in horror of like, I can't read her articles, like
Yeah.
you monster. Is that an unfair kind of thing? I mean, I don't know what you do immorally.
Well, yeah, and then what I would say to the future generations is, listen, everyone else was eating veal, you know, and it tastes really good, which
Yeah.
is in many ways very close to the pan-fried onions dilemma. Right?
Yeah, like Wagner, there wasn't that many opera writers, I guess, or classical writers. Like, what if that was the argument, being like, listen, like, that's all there was. I had to listen to him.
And you lived in Europe, you had to be an anti-Semite.
There was no choice.
So are you, like, just to take another example, Louis C.K., do you think, are you upset that he's, like, doing stand-up now, or do you feel like, no, he's famous?
So I get a lot of enjoyment out of him. And comedy is so specific too. Like the argument of, oh, just find someone else doesn't fly with a comedian, right? They're so specific and they're so sort of narrow. Yeah, and his particular offense, I'm not super well versed. I'll probably put my foot in my mouth here somewhere, but I think it was consensually asking women that, like, he wanted to jerk off in front of them.
Yeah.
But of course, there's this whole power dynamic of like they felt like they had to say yes because of his position. Even if he claims like if they said no, he'd be fine with it. It was maybe just an immoral ask because of the impossibility of saying no.
Well, also, a lot of the
Yeah.
women didn't say yes.
Is that so? I don't know.
Yeah. So
and
I
he
mean,
still did.
Well, right. So I think that there was silence,
Yeah.
and then he was like, "Well, they didn't say no."
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I think, yeah, the way to answer this is the personal one, right? It's really hard to make a normative claim here. For myself, I can separate the art from the artist, and I like his comedy. It would be, I don't know if he has a moral obligation to address it in his comedy or in the art itself, but I would be interested, because a lot of his kind of comedy was very self-loathing and
Right.
reflexive and admitting of his flaws. And so when that story came out, I wasn't surprised at all that Louis
not at
C.K. was
all.
kind of like a slob and a little bit of had a sexual fetish. And I don't think this is the question about the specific kind of art and maybe what we expect, or like an athlete is another thing. I'm a huge Eagles fan. We're doing this interview in Philadelphia. When Michael Vick got signed by the Eagles, that was a big moral dilemma for a lot of Eagles fans. I love dogs, and this guy is like killing dogs, and you're like, okay, how do I do this? Does it take my enjoyment away from the game? Frankly, it did a little bit. It dampened it. But you're like, well, he's a good athlete, and I want to enjoy just that narrow person. He's a performer, and that's how he's performing here. There seems that there are some positions in society that maybe we do hold to a higher moral standard and maybe we ought to, like politicians is this easy one of like, not everyone gets to lead us. And so if you did that shitty thing, like, okay, someone else gets to do it. Athletes, musicians, I don't know. They're artists and performers that I personally, I don't really care. I don't know if it says something about me that I can continue to listen to Louis C.K. I think the line that you drew about public versus private is really important, actually. I don't think I've played Louis C.K. on like a radio in front of people
Right.
since his issues have come out. And particularly if there was someone there who was offended by it, I would turn it off immediately.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't think differently about them or myself. But maybe that's the mistake. That's why I was interested when you were like, oh, I couldn't be friends with you anymore.
Well, we can't be friends. So I'm glad that we already established that. But it's funny, the Louis C.K. example, because on my bookshelf here, there used to be a book that was a gift to me called Louis C.K. and Philosophy. And it's there's a series of books like this where it's, different comedians. It's actually like a book, one of those book chapter books where philosophers contribute to their thoughts. And my friend noticed it one day, and he said, "What the hell is that?" And I didn't even know it was on my shelf anymore. And I also was a little bit embarrassed. I would have never bought a book. Even before Louis C.K.'s downfall, I never would have bought a book like that. It was a gift for me from a non-academic person who doesn't understand that is a trash book. But I'm not going to throw a book away. I'm not going to give it away. I'll keep it. But so it's now on my shelf turning backwards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that
Very
the spine
passive-aggressive,
does not,
you're right.
Right. Yeah. Right. I couldn't get rid of it.
Yeah.
But I also didn't want I never thought someone might just look and see the wayward spine and ask me about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we sacrificing, so this notion of genius and behavioral hall pass, we don't have to call Louis C.K. a genius here, but are we risking sort of this seek for moral purity of our public figures or our performers? Are we risking missing out on some really great ideas and great art because we're just going to filter out way too many bad people? How many people would pass this test in this bar? I mean, how high are we setting it?
The thing that I don't like, where a lot of these conversations end up turning into this slippery slope argument of if we get rid of Louis C.K., then we have to, pull down all our monuments of George Washington. Whoa. But yeah, but going back to this idea of utilitarianism, it's about balance. Yeah, maybe it's okay if middling comics who fall short of genius, they don't get to be as famous anymore. Maybe that's okay. That's a sacrifice worth making.
Right.
In addition to, you think of it as a long-term strategy, right? Well, people will understand that maybe in the short term there's some suffering because you are weeding out people who are really bad, but then children are seeing these role models, people who are potentially role models are no longer role models. They see you can't do that, you can't get away with that in the society. And so hopefully, this is the optimistic view, this actually would affect how people behave in the future.
Maybe there is an interesting question here of, if there's a deeper philosophical question of what is pleasure and what is enjoyment and what is aesthetic pleasure and aesthetic enjoyment. And is this something that is inherently beyond your control or will to affect? If you like something, is that this fundamental, untouchable nature of just your, for lack of a better word, your soul that's just doing this thing? Or is that not a true philosophical picture that I'm painting? Is that another cop-out? Is that the Woody Allen, the heart?
Well, right. It's funny. There is an analogy in just moral behavior, setting aside aesthetic stuff. This idea of will versus grace. What does it mean to be a good person? Is the good person the person who just has grace and is never tempted to do the wrong thing? Or is the good person the one who is tempted and then has the willpower to not do it? And so this is a legitimate question, right? Are you a better person for just spontaneously no longer being able to enjoy the artist after it turns out that they're bad?
Yeah.
Or is it, you could also see it as, no, it's also an act of moral courage for people to say I'm tempted to do things that I think I don't morally believe in, but I don't do them.
So I'm a coward because I listen to
Louis
C.K.
Yep.
Louis C.K. Yeah.
You're a coward. And now, not only have you been privately listening to him, you've announced it on the podcast.
Yeah. In this, to bring it back, if she decides or she feels like this is the wrong thing to keep listening to pan-fried onions, she is now trying to override with her will, or she's wondering if she ought to or she could. Yeah, it does seem like there's so much motivated reason there.
Right.
Of I just like it because I like it.
And we're all susceptible to that.
Yeah.
Right? Woody Allen's movies are so good that, and no one's going to notice anyway. And it's just going to be motivated reasoning upon motivated reasoning.
I love this will versus grace thing. I'm picturing, I keep hitting this moral bedrock, a lot of my questions that I've been dealing with this of, and I don't know if this is a appropriate progressive versus conservative slant, but you hit this bedrock of like, well, okay, this is sort of our evolution, and our evolutionary biology is like geared me this way, which almost feels like the sort of I like it because I like it, and I don't know why. It's sort of like this thing that's beyond me, versus this notion of, well, we have a moral obligation, maybe a moral duty, and certainly a moral opportunity, because we're a special kind of animal, to transcend the residue of our evolution. We're not stuck with these kinds of, animalistic behaviors and tribalistic behaviors. We can transcend that, and that feels like the progressive sort of bent of like, we're not stuck with that stuff, where the conservative rather doubts that we can do that. Things like even marriage structures being these like solid evolutionarily designed kind of structures, and like you're messing with God in these ways if you equate God with evolution in this bizarre analogy I'm making. Does that work at play here at all, of like the base of this? Maybe not even with this analogy, but the way that it seems the liberal, maybe purity politics of eating their own and going after Al Franken and this and that, and the right just being like, Donald Trump's president, like whatever, like we'll shrug, because they're like, well, that's just evolution, and like, we can't transcend.
I don't think there's
stuff.
anything inherently left-wing or right-wing about that. Especially because it's quite easy to conjure examples that go in the other direction, right? Where, let's say, at least in pre-Trump times, the moral purity was going to people who were supporting, like, Christian fundamentalists, and don't listen to like rap music and so forth. And it's an interesting way things seem to be kind of shifting. There was a poll that was done right before the 2016 election. And I think that is done every year around the same time of year, that asked the question, is it ever acceptable or if a presidential candidate has had sexual, like extramarital affairs, can they serve in office? Is it okay? And asking the Christian right. The Christian right in 2014, overwhelming majority of them said, no, of course not. If you cheat on your wife, or if you're otherwise have some kind of sexual violation, you're not fit for office. But right before, in October of 2016, you ask the same group, and now it's completely flipped. 80% of them say, of course it's fine. It has no influence on their governing. And you see that none of this ever had anything to do with your political orientation. It always had to do with who did you want to lead, and then all of your reasoning follows after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, in this case, Frankie likes pan-fried onions, and she likely will just make that same calculus. If you like it, you like it. And there's this
Well, unless all your friends
nature.
aren't listening to it, and then maybe you would think twice.
Yeah,
Right.
That's an interesting part of your moral analysis of the power of the crowds, not even maybe necessarily the wisdom of the crowd.
Oh, right. Not the wisdom. Set the wisdom aside, but just the power.
The power of the crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah. Public shaming in a way, or public celebration, I guess, if someone is.
Yeah.
The interesting thing would be to flip it. It would be like, what if someone's music is like terrible, but they're a really great person? Should you listen to them more? Can that actually make you enjoy the music
I think that's the
more?
whole concept behind like electing Jimmy Carter, right? Like, like he's so good. It doesn't matter if he can lead us politically.
I still like the pictures of him with Habitat for Humanity and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just give him a break. He's just like, that's great. Okay, I think we stabbed at it enough. I think that's really, really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was a lot of
Thanks
fun.
for having me.
This notion of this will versus grace thing I was pretty challenged by. I guess it's the same thing as moral luck. In this case, I guess the way it's written, Frankie would she would have the challenge to overcome. She just didn't spontaneously stop liking it when she got this news. And is she a better person if she can actually overcome that versus someone who's just lucky, like a moral doofus who just like accidentally is moral because of whatever dials are tweaked in that they just are this perfect person, versus maybe those of us who are like, oh wait, I still like Louis C.K. So when I asked her directly, like, am I making a mistake by still listening to him? I have to like override that. You think it's trainable, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So you think I still am making a mistake by like liking Louis C.K.?
Yes.
And I was also like totally unfamiliar with exactly like what actually the crime is.
Yeah. I mean, for me, Louis C.K. came back recently, I heard, and his set was mostly it didn't seem that funny or that good.
I've seen like 5 or 6 of his sets since he came back.
Yeah.
Yeah?
And he
Kills it every time.
Really?
Crowd loves it every time.
I just heard him talking about the Parkland kids, insulting them.
And
I
everyone
don't
in the room
know.
was laughing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. The thing about comedy is that one of my friends made an analogy, like if you filmed or recorded an intimate moment with your romantic partner and then looked at it the next day when you were no longer in that mood, it would seem like, oh my God, like, but at the moment, whatever you said in the heat of the moment, it felt comedy is very much like that.
Truly. I understand. But for me, Louis C.K. hasn't done his time. And I think that there's a real moral consequence to going out and seeing his shows when you could go see someone else who isn't such a shitty person. Like, part of the Me Too movement was talking not about just the act of being sexually harassing women and things like that. Like, that's bad. But it's also the consequence of that person taking up space and power when some other talented person who he screwed and when they didn't want it could have had that spot. So to me, there's a cost.
Yeah, it's like this zero-sum game of, I mean, I tried to bring it up of the argument of like, there's other comics, go listen to someone else. But for me, like the comedy one doesn't fly of like, there's no other Louis C.K.
Well, I don't think that
Louis C.K.?
actually, that argument doesn't fly for anything.
Okay.
I mean, like, if you were to ask a musician, well, can't you just listen to like a hardcore R. Kelly fan or MJ fan? They would be like,
find them. Yeah.
what are you talking about? There's so many subtle differences between Michael Jackson and Prince. Like, if you were to ask any connoisseur of any of these things, they you know. But I mean, my contention would be every time I've seen Louis C.K., audience is half male, half female. People are drunk. They spent money to come. Generally, they don't know that Louis coming. Right.
Yeah. I've seen him like that too.
Right.
Like, I paid money to the slipper room and he shows up.
And maybe there have been one, maybe 2 instances where someone got up and walked away. So we're talking about 99% of the crowd, normal folks of both genders, think it's fine. They're laughing their asses off. And what would seem to logically follow from the ethical feeling that is wrong is that everyone in that crowd was doing a moral evil of some kind. Mm-hmm. Would you follow through with that?
It's different, right? Because maybe they didn't actively know he was coming.
They
right?
didn't. No.
So that's one thing. If he shows up and you happen to see him and you find it funny, I think that's in a different bucket from actively seeking out, going and giving him your money so that you can listen to what he has to say. And I think like it's like Michael Jackson or something. If we find out those things and we change our consumption pattern, he had a great run, great music, we're done. That's one thing. But if they keep doing it and you keep giving them money, that's a totally different animal.
Why?
Because it's like supporting someone who is not necessarily being punished for their potentially illegal behavior. And as a culture, we are condoning that. I think, a lot of people talk about this with the NFL, for instance, but I don't know.
I'm wearing an Eagles hat now.
From my perspective,
I'm a Steelers fan.
No,
so,
but yeah, and Michael Vick's not on the Eagles anymore. But it was
Anyway.
It seems
but I'm
a
sure
little
there's
bit.
jerks on the Eagles, but
Ben Roethlisberger and the Steelers.
yes, there you go.
Yep.
Let's table that one, Coleman.
Well, I was just gonna say, like from my perspective, it seems like I can understand the argument that it changes when you're sponsoring them, when you're putting money in their bank account knowingly. At the same time, it feels a little bit like cutting off my nose to spite my face, in the sense that if I really find a person's work valuable in this narrow realm of music or comedy, right? I find that valuable. It gives me pleasure. I'm in some sense like punishing myself in my desire to punish them as well. If I'm not going to enjoy this, I'm not going to sponsor this, and I'm going to forego that. Perhaps that's a morally noble thing to do, but I think that's a cost that has to be grappled with at the same time. It's not as if that's nothing.
I wanted to bring, I know we're both reading this book, Everybody Lies, at the moment. I don't know if you know this big data book. It's quite interesting. I can't help but think about it here. of the there's this chapter where he breaks down sort of the curated social media self versus like the true self, and he's trying to find that true self using like Google searches, and the effect is extreme. I think he was comparing like the National Enquirer readers versus Atlantic readers, and it was something like on Facebook, of an Atlantic article is 27 times more likely to be shared than a National Enquirer article, 27 times. And in reality, in Google searches, it's like 1-to-1. They're like just as popular.
Wow.
But nobody like publicly will sort of admit that like, yeah, I love the National Enquirer. That's like trashy tabloid. They're like, yeah, I read the Atlantic and I read all the articles. And it's like with this dilemma, we're dealing with this like true self. Frankie here might go around and tell all her friends, if she's like a young girl or something, like, yeah, pan-fried onions, fuck them. Like, I don't listen to them anymore. That guy's an asshole. But if she genuinely likes it, is she punishing herself? And also like, probably she's going to listen to it when no one else is around. But for the moral question, since that's sort of like what we try to do at this table a lot, I really wonder about that Facebook versus, the Google search bar versus like really what you're doing on Facebook. And I wonder if ethically there is some sort of like, should we be more like those selves that we pretend to be on Facebook? Would that be a more ethical world? Or is it the reverse of like, let's all just admit that we're sort of slobs. And yeah, I find Louis C.K. funny. And like, I'm just going to say it and not pretend that I don't. Like, which one actually is the moral world? I'm actually not sure about that question.
I don't want Coleman to get the impression that I'm some sort of purity politics person.
Yeah.
Because I think that's damaging as well. Like, I don't want to say, oh, I never found Louis C.K. funny, because that's just not true. I just think of how does my action help or hurt society? And so maybe, for instance, I mentioned in one of the breaks that I find Floyd Mayweather very sort of fascinating as a person. And I sort of find something entertaining about looking at his Instagram. But I've thought I should stop following him because this is helping someone who's known to abuse women potentially. So it's hard. Like, how am I actively helping the fame of someone whose behavior I might publicly find reprehensible, but when I'm scrolling through Instagram in my bed, I'm like, oh, that's kind of funny.
And is it the future, like with all of these, when you push them hard enough, they all become a trolley problem? If it is like, you're Floyd Mayweather will beat another woman sometime in the future if we allow him to keep being famous and do that. Like, somebody is on that trolley that's happening. But on the other side, how do you measure and weigh, again, in the utilitarian calculus, how much joy he's bringing you, how much like entertainment he's bringing the world, how much just his boxing skill and whatever I don't find him that entertaining to watch, actually. It's super defensive.
And entertainment are two different things. So,
yeah. And in like the purity thing, because like with any of these calculus, like you get in a car, okay, you're adding a little carbon to the atmosphere. Like there's a cost to everything morally. Like literally nothing is morally pure. And we should talk about a way to design ourselves out of that somehow. But that does seem to be the, like, you can play the game that you're somebody is always on the tracks in the trolley problem that you're pulling, always, including listening to Louis C.K. So I don't know. At some point, it just becomes distracting, which is why I like her analysis of self-creation and like where you draw that line. Everybody's killing someone on the trolley at all times. We're all doing it somehow in some analysis. But where you draw those lines and where you pull them is yourself and your self-creation. So I don't know. And then, I mean, maybe the political thing that I tried to do with her was distracting of the purity politics, which at the moment, and she was rightfully to point out, like that changes and that flips. At the moment seems to be Al Franken is getting a very different punishment than obviously someone like Donald Trump. And maybe that was like a wrong button to push for her. It's hard not to notice it at the moment of the like, there's a cost to everything, including listening to Louis C.K.
I mean, I want to push on what exactly the cost is, how much exactly it is, in terms of something she brought up, which was a deterrent value.
Yeah. In
some sense, there is this, like, by who we endorse, we are kind of creating a social incentive structure for future people, right? Like, to some extent, we're seeing, people are weighing the cost benefit analysis of their future actions given who is getting punished. That all that stuff matters. The question I'm asking myself is a young man right now who maybe he's entering comedy, he's seeing Louis C.K., he's seeing him getting punished, absorbing the big picture carrots and sticks of the society he lives in order to somewhat decide how to behave in life and who to be. Does he see, well, Louis C.K., he only got, he only was out of the game for 11 months. He didn't suffer that much. Therefore, the cost of behaving like a schmuck towards women is low enough that I'm gonna risk it. Mm-hmm. I mean, from my point of view, Louis C.K., this was, he lost some $35 million off of this. He is, some portion of his fan base permanently will not sponsor him anymore. Mm-hmm. So when you say he didn't suffer enough, personally, I'm not interested in the suffering of people who have done wrong. And I would find many people would agree with me here if we just started talking about, for example, the criminal justice system. We're restructuring the whole thing to be less about suffering and punitiveness and more about rehabilitation. That ethos seems to me to completely get lost when the person is viewed as someone with, quote, power. That's a wrinkle to this. And I just, when you say that the cost has not been high enough, I don't think, I think our norms are changing seriously for the better around sexual assault in this country. And I don't think that the lack of punitiveness on Louis C.K. is acting as a kind of incentive or lack of deterrent for young males behaving badly.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's a difference between where taste and culture moves and where the criminal justice system moves. And it just so happens that things like sexual assault and rape are very difficult to change policy around. You can do it. You should do it. But it's not a panacea for the fact that sexual assault will continue to happen in the future. It's just going to happen. It depends on how we're going to react to it as a culture. And I think that we need to make that not okay culturally in order to make up for the lack of teeth in our laws.
Yeah, that's interesting. That the danger of punishment and who gets to decide how much is enough and what is enough is something that we've maybe lost trust in or faith in sort of the government structures and judicial structures to handle it. So we're just going to take it into our own hands with this social media vigilante justice.
Yeah.
She brings up the power of the crowds again, rather than the wisdom of the crowds, because how do we make them more at least ethically wise seems to just be a big monster. But I like that notion of hey, if the courts did a better job, we wouldn't freak out on Twitter and bury this guy's career. I don't know.
What's democracy? You have to participate. You have to raise your voice. And if you don't, things won't get better. So to me, it's not just about changing the culture. It is a push to change the laws, which are changing and which we need to do in America, basically. That's why I hate when people say, oh, get back to singing, Cardi, and stop talking about how great Obama is and how horrible Trump is. No, she has a cultural responsibility to talk about these things.
That's actually interesting. Maybe that, to bring it back to the musician thing. Who was the other artist? Is it Taylor Swift or something? During the last election cycle.
T-Swift.
But if I remember correctly, in the last election with Trump in 2016, she was getting shit for remaining apolitical.
Yeah.
And so is your argument that was legitimate shit? That I'm going to give you a Michael Jordan quote because he used to get this shit all the time. and it was I forget even the election. It may have been George Bush the first, but they were challenging with the same thing of what do you think about who should win and this and that? And he was annoyingly apolitical to everyone. And his response was always just Republicans buy shoes too. and this was
get your paper, man.
It was just I'm not going to make enemies there.
Well, T-Swift, she was very apolitical. And then eventually her fan base did push her. She did make a Democratic endorsement in the last election. Yeah, it was against Marsha Blackburn, that's for sure. And people were really upset. There were a lot of pro-Trump folks who were really upset, especially because Taylor Swift was allegedly this alt-right goddess or, the ultimate Aryan woman or something like this. And people were really upset. But I think her fan base eventually pushed her into doing that. So it really is the power of the audience and what they want.
Can I forecast the danger that I see here with this stuff? All right, so I'm wearing an Eagles hat. I'm a football fan and an Eagles fan. And yeah, it's fine, boomy. And not a Trump fan. We won the Super Bowl a year ago now.
We still have.
Speaking
He's got
of
6, I
We
think.
have 2 on each, 1 on each thumb. Yeah, just saying.
I know. We've won. It's really big. But with I guess what I'm concerned about with this notion of art, now we're talking sports as well as a kind of art form, and maybe this is just like a way political ending of this particular episode, but losing the spaces that are apolitical. I wonder about apolitical arenas to play these kinds of important moral kind of calculus games as a society. Or the ability of those things, again, in this utilitarian calculus, the ability of something like sports to be a uniting factor or like music to be a uniting factor. Does it matter if I can go to a concert of someone whose music I like, and then there's someone else who also clearly likes that music, all the words to the songs that I know? We might be drastically different political people. And if this artist made a political endorsement, one of us would be super annoyed and one of us would be super happy. And if that endorsement happens, we will lose this another realm that is actually sort of a uniting force. Like when the Eagles won the Super Bowl, I was in Philadelphia when it happened. I'm hugging strangers and tears are flowing and I'm high-fiving people who probably talking about other subjects would not go very well. But we at least had this one thing. And just as a reminder of common humanity, art has always had this ability to do that. A Woody Allen film, well, now I know about the Beatles, but something like the White Album would be this uniting force. Do you worry just about losing those arenas in this kind of purity politics or effort to I mean, I guess you haven't answered that question yet. Do you think Taylor Swift had a moral obligation to do that because of her platform? Or did she actually lose an important platform because she lost that uniting kind of environment that she was also orchestrating?
Or was she going to lose money if she didn't say something because people would be upset with her?
That's the cynical view, but also that, sure.
There's something about that too.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question. I'd like to think that if a ritual doesn't work, if somehow the ritual falls apart, you have to reinvent the ritual. So if there's something wrong with football and it's suddenly becoming divisive because some people are taking knees and some people aren't, you have to rethink the ritual a little bit. If Taylor Swift is no longer a uniting force, you maybe we need to rethink music. And then finally, it comes down to the way we've fragmented and put our entire selves on display. Maybe what I'm saying is, I want a little more privacy.
Yeah.
Well, I want to do things that aren't broadcast, and I want to do them with other people collectively. I mean, I do that with Shabbat, and I'm sitting at a table with people who are really, really different from me, and I'm doing something that we literally cannot take pictures of on Friday nights. And I love that. I love that there are things that we don't broadcast. And I think in order to move ahead morally, especially when it comes to art and culture, we have to do things that are impermanent, offline, personal, and in person. And I think that's where we reinvent the ritual a little bit.
And does the artist have the same right to that as well? I mean, because that's what I'm...
More live shows. I don't know.
No, I mean, the question there...
Shouldn't Louis be able to do a comedy show in private that's not recorded?
Yeah.
And it's just the people in the room?
Or just but
then it gets leaked and it's...
Yeah. Or just what you do in your personal life.
There's an intimacy about things like that. I guess when you're famous, when you're Taylor Swift or Louis C.K., you don't get any of that privacy. It's imagine the effect of that psychologically. It's everything you could say could be filmed, could be broadcast, could take you down. I think there's a serious cost for those people and for society probably to I guess treat people like Taylor Swift or Louis C.K. as not human beings just because they have a quote platform. People think I don't really like the argument that you have a platform, therefore you have a completely different set of ethical responsibilities. That there's a kind of moral luck dimension to that because like there are plenty of talented singers out there who could have been the next Taylor Swift in principle. Taylor, she caught a wave. She had people behind her, whatever. Does that confer on her a whole new set of responsibilities that those other people don't have? What if she's not particularly a political person? She doesn't feel informed. Maybe it's not her lane.
I mean, I was trying to accept that argument that like, because I'm actually, this will be a follow-up question, but of, let's call it ethical opportunity. It's totally luck, but there's an opportunity where you can affect a lot of change for good or for bad. And does that grant you or force you to have an obligation there? Even if I accept that that's true, what I was trying to do in that last bit with Taylor Swift or Danielle is I wonder if the best thing that she could do there, or any of these people can do, is actually is to not ruin the uniting sort of apolitical arena that is being orchestrated in something like art that has this just inherently universal appeal, where we're like, is that thing that we're projecting not her art? I mean,
is any art apolitical? That's like a classic question there.
It is.
The attraction to just the arenas that art can create. Period. Art in the abstract are potentially universal. They're not tribal. They're not inherently ethnic. It's like, you can, everyone can like a certain song hypothetically, or a certain sport or whatever. Thinking
for me, I want to get back to the Taylor Swift thing. I remember when on the night of Trump's election, I was like many people on the left, absolutely surprised and dejected, and I felt like I was witnessing a swing into fascism, and my whole being was vibrating with this sense of anger and surprise and shock. And I remember one of my roommates, I said, "Who did you vote for?" And he said, honestly, he's a little right leaning, and I knew that, and I didn't care. But he said, honestly, I was not informed enough to make a decision. He was a music head, composer, trumpet player. I didn't look into the issues. And I felt uninformed, so I did not vote. And I was angry at him. I was so angry at him for not taking a side at minimum. And upon reflection, I feel like that was a moment that I'm not proud of, because I think he was being the honest one, saying that, it's not my particular thing. I'm a human being on this earth choosing to live my life according to my values. Those values aren't in politics. Just because Taylor Swift has a platform, quote unquote, I'm not even sure really people are really getting their politics from Taylor Swift. Like who has set on their candidate and then says, "Oh well, Taylor Swift endorsed the other one, so now I'm going to change."
I'm sure there's a few. Young people who are voting for the first time. I'm sure it impacts them. And keep in mind,
we live in a world where like Jenny McCarthy like started the anti-vax movement. So like kids are dying of the measles or whatever, getting through the measles because a porn star told them that their kid would get autism. So let's not underestimate. Yeah, Jenny and Jim Carrey and the rest of the crew.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was my point? I don't remember.
I think it's on the question of like the moral responsibility and obligation if you happen to have a platform.
I think for the people who want to do it, they do it. I like Sarah Silverman when Trump tweets something ridiculous and Sarah Silverman with her 10 million followers just like claps back. I'm like, cool. Good for that. That's good. That's good that there are people who are willing to do that with a platform. I don't think they have a moral obligation to do it.
Yeah. So to wrap this one up and bring it back to the dilemma sort of as written, we've got Frankie sounds like a young girl listening to this music. Like what would I could ask like what your advice to her would be, because I think we're all failing to make some sort of normative claim of like, this is what she really should do in this situation. But if she asked you of like, what should I listen to this band anymore, this music anymore? I'm not even sure what I would tell her. I don't know.
I would probably say, sister, look, I'm going to get real with you. Don't buy another album from these people. Don't go to another concert. Don't actively spend your money or click. But if you really, really like them, go ahead and sit in your room and listen. But also know, what are you internalizing when you're listening to them?
Yeah.
And then I would give her a list of other bands to listen to.
That's fair enough.
And hope that none of them have a bad past as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's rough.
Low.
It's rough.
Don't give her the White Album, apparently.
Oh no! You guys really ruined this for me.
but
I don't know.
Maybe I didn't make.
I'm still gonna listen to the Beatles. Maybe
Is it possible?
Because there are other Beatles more than John Lennon.
Yeah, but there's no other White Album.
Is that really a good enough principle? Or is it because he's dead, so you can't contribute to him? That does make a difference. Or it could.
It does make a difference.
If you were alive, if John Lennon were alive today, would you listen to the Beatles?
Given what I
Or
now
purchase it?
kind of know in a rumor, I don't know. I'd have to get back
Not
to
in
you.
a rumor. Not in a rumor. He admitted.
He looked it up.
He admitted himself.
Okay, well,
That
just
he beat
because
several
you
women.
listened to something or looked up something on Google doesn't mean it's true.
See,
I'm gonna look it up
Wow, I
myself.
love it. Come on.
The motivated reasoning is
Motivated
strong.
reasoning, confirmation bias.
But wait,
He
but,
said it in a Playboy interview in 1980.
but there's an to add maybe just one more
And
final
this is how
layer.
Frankie will feel. When when it's your thing, it's
your
different.
thing,
It's
yeah.
like you want to defend it.
Yeah,
and
Mel Gibson. No, I'm just kidding.
We
Please
all
don't defend Mel
The thing is,
Gibson.
like, if we all
defend
have
Mel.
our thing. John Lennon's not my. I don't give a
Yeah.
shit about John Lennon because I don't listen. So I'm fine saying I'm not going to buy his shit. But with my thing,
Yeah,
then
that's your
I feel like
thing.
to answer your question, what I would tell Frankie is, do what you want. Don't enforce things for other people.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
And is it possible, like, if you can really separate the art from the artist here, can you criticize the artist while consuming their art? Like, that's
sure.
that's what I always hope is the sure. Yeah, sure. Because I'll criticize Mel Gibson, but I like Apocalypto. Like, I think you can marry those two things.
In fact, I think
and
it's
maybe
more powerful because the truth is a lot of people, like, no matter how rational arguments you give them, are going to say, fuck you, I'm still listening to X, whether it's the Beatles, whether that's Louis C.K. And to make the case as a person who still listens to them, to say this is all the reasons why Woody Allen is a deeply messed up human being, Louis C.K., whomever, to acknowledge that you still listen to them, you can maybe reach those people who would not listen to you if you just said, I'm not listening to them, I'm not sponsoring them, and you're not going to sponsor them, or you're unethical if you do. Then it's like they're not even going to hear necessarily the arguments about changing norms about interactions between men and women or whatever. They might just reject everything you say.
But that's like saying that you don't have the right to persuade people to your opinion. I mean, I could have an opinion, deeply held, and I could even believe that, for instance, in this case, the Onion Band
is a bad name.
If you want to listen to their music, fine, but the guy is horrible, okay? But I have the right to persuade Frankie, and to think that we don't have the right to try to persuade
I didn't say
other
that.
people. But you said, you should have your idea and I'll have my idea.
I'm saying what I would say to Frankie is feel free to buy their music. Yeah. But if someone else feels they can't, that's fine. I think there is completely room for plurality in the sense that those who can separate the art from the artist. So, for example, I can't fully separate Louis C.K. from, I hear his jokes differently. I'm not going to be persuaded out of that. That's just a fact. I can still listen to MJ. I can listen to XXXTentacion. Those are just facts about me. I don't want to be persuaded out of that either. I absolutely don't endorse sexual assault or murder or whatever. And there are other people for whom they can listen to certain stuff. They can't do certain stuff. And I feel like it's all fine. I feel like there's an individuality principle here where if you can do it, do it. If you can't do it, that's fine. And we don't have to be, the two camps don't have to be like, you must be like me about this, or you must be like me. I feel like there's just room.
And in using Nina's language to sort of like to marry both of your views there is I was really attracted to her notion of self-creation. So if it is you want to persuade Frankie, I think I find that language helpful, and for me a bit challenging of like, okay, yeah, this is a self that I'm creating. In the gym analogy, I'm playing whatever I'm playing in that boombox in some way, and I'm announcing this even just to myself of like, okay, I'm the kind of person that does this. And she just sort of in her admittedly passive aggressive way says like, can you live with yourself as that kind of person? Maybe that's a bit too snide of her, but it's an important challenge. It's important, just consideration at least.
I remember an interview that Stephen Colbert did with Jerry Seinfeld on his show about Louis C.K. And they disagreed. At first, Steve Colbert said, you know what? I can't listen to it anymore now that I know what it is. And Jerry Seinfeld was like, of course I can listen to it. I find it funny, blah, blah, blah. And by the end of the episode, Stephen Colbert had persuaded Jerry that, you know, his was the right view, or not right, but that might have been a more persuasive argument. And now Jerry is not going to listen to Louis C.K.
Or maybe that's because he was on TV and
and
signaling
very possible,
loudly, which is like,
self-creation. There you go.
Wow.
But he said, look at this. Stephen persuaded me to think differently, and I agreed with him. And that's a statement. We can change our minds.
Yes, certainly.
And we shouldn't not do that. And I agree, there is to a point where there's plurality in taste and consumption and separating the art from the artist. But there is also a boundary when you start rubbing up against, I don't know, like white supremacist rock. And there are points where you start getting into blurry and very wrong, like, hey, you should not be listening to that kind of place, right?
For me, I guess, if I drew a sort of line that feels normative, it is the trolley problem of still who is on the future tracks there.
Yep.
If there's future harm that you're definitely considering that, you know, someone's going to get hurt, there's a future crime that is likely going to be committed here if I you know, consume this art, then you're there. Which is why also her notion of apology, of like if it's a genuine apology, and then like go ahead.
Or did they get punished?
Or did they get punished? But I'm with Coleman that, you know, inherently punishment on its own is an incoherent idea. But if the punishment is an active deterrent, which is a useful conversation, then I'm with you.
I shouldn't say punishment. I should say justice. Is there justice? Did they go through a court of law? Do we feel like the victims of whatever crime got justice for the wrongs that they did?
Yeah, well, a court of law,
I mean, I would argue the reason we have courts of law to begin with is because the public is so bad at dealing out justice in an even-handed and fair way, parsing the facts on both sides.
Yeah.
That's the reason courts exist in at least semi-functional nations, is because mob justice is infinitely worse. It obeys no principles, so that people are fine with John Lennon, for example, but not fine with XXXTentacion. Makes no, like, the justice system at least tries to obey laws and principles and due process. It doesn't satisfy our notion of cosmic fairness because nothing could.
Yeah.
I would argue, but I dislike the idea that mob justice should fill in the gaps that the legal system is missing, because the legal system is the better system. It's there as an alternative to mob justice, which is so unfair and unprincipled and terrible, which is not to say you cannot express your opinion. Obviously, I'm like a free speech absolutist. I think you should try to persuade. I'm glad Jerry Seinfeld changed his mind. I'm sorry you haven't changed your mind on Lennon yet, but it's fine.
I don't know where I stand with Lennon.
Well, you're allowed to not know where you stand. That's totally
you.
okay. I don't think it says something about you as an individual in terms of your moral self, as we were talking about. I just don't think it, like, I know so little about you. I know so little about how you treat people. You could be going to soup kitchens every single day, and if you didn't change your mind about John Lennon, I would say, well, she's an asshole. You know, like, that presumption, I'm so against that.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm right there with you. But I do think that we do need to speak out if we think laws are unjust or the systems are unjust.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, all right.
Well, now Coleman has to get to know me, so that, and I need to learn more about you, Jay, so that I don't think that you have horrible taste because you like Apocalypto.
We're gonna watch Apocalypto together.
No.
I think we should end this episode by playing Wagner and just seeing how if you could do that.
I'm out.
If you could separate the art from the artist.
Wagner and R. Kelly at the same time.
Someone must be working on this. I mean,
there's a mashup artist out there.
You just gave someone a great idea of, like, let's combine all of the
girl talk. Yeah. Please do it.
And the cover will be a Hitler painting, and then we'll just see, like, yeah. Okay. I think we ran out of ideas this one, so I don't know how to end this one. But yeah, that was great. And before I end this episode, I want to mention where we got this dilemma from, which came from the National High School Ethics Bowl, which is this awesome philosophy competition for high schoolers that I've been volunteering with and involved with for 4 years. And it's great. We're pulling a lot of the dilemmas from season 1 from their archives. So just a shout out to National High School Ethics Pool. Check them out online, get involved, all that kind of stuff. And to tease next week's dilemma, we are going to be doing a driverless cars dilemma with Matthew Crawford, who we mentioned in this one. Although he's taking a bit of a different angle on it. It's not the classic trolley problem one. It's more about the psychological notion of why we drive and this question of sort of imagining a future world with driverless cars. Will it be immoral to allow people to drive themselves in that world? So it should be fun. So cool. Thanks.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want more, don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment because we'd love to hear what you think. Until next time.